I'm Sarah. I'm going to be doing my presentation on an issue that affects millions of people around the world, especially women and young girls. It's an industry that generates $32 billion every year around the world, and it involves between 20 to 30 million people. According to the U.S. State Department, there are 600,000 to 800,000 merchandise in this industry transported across international borders every year. You might have a few guesses as to what industry I could be talking about and what merchandise. Well, the merchandise is people and the industry is human trafficking. According to DoSomething.org, human trafficking is the illegal trade of human beings through recruitment or abduction by means of force or fraud for the purposes of forced labor, debt bondage, or sexual exploitation. It's also known as modern-day slavery. I put together a slideshow to play in the background during my presentation of additional quotes and statistics and stories of victims in trafficking. So feel free to read those as I'm giving my presentation. And they come from the RichmondJusticeInitiative.com and GlobalFreedomCenter.org. You might have heard the expression that you can't put a price on love or another person. Well, the human trafficking industry would disagree with this. Around the world, on average, you can purchase another human being for $90. Here are a few stats about human trafficking. Out of the 600,000 to 800,000 victims that I mentioned previously that are transported across international borders every year, there are approximately 70% of these are female. The average age that a teenager is trafficked into the sex trade in the United States is between 12 to 14 years old. There are between 14,500 and 17,500 people trafficked in the United States each year. It is the third largest international crime industry. The only two that are above it are drugs and weapon dealing. According to the CoveringHouse.org, $9.5 billion are generated each year in the United States from the human trafficking. And the U.S. Department of Justice states that a pimp, or the one who controls the trafficking victims, can make between $1,500 and $200,000 per victim each year, and the average pimp has between 4 to 6 girls that they have control over. Victims in the sex trafficking industry are often forced to have sex 20 to 48 times a day with different people. The ways that victims are trapped into trafficking: in foreign countries, this often happens by being taken or tricked into trafficking because they think they are promised a better life or a good job in a different country, or they might be sold by their own families if they don't have enough money to support everyone. In the United States, this often happens by meeting online or in person someone that acts as a boyfriend or a friend and promises love and comfort at first, and then turns out to be the trafficker or sells them into trafficking. Another place where a lot of victims come from is runaways. According to the National Runaway Hotline, 1 out of 3 teens that run away in the United States are lured into prostitution within 48 hours of leaving their home. Human trafficking is a problem that affects millions of people in all countries of the world. It's such a big problem because it's very difficult for victims to get out of trafficking once they have been trapped. Sometimes traffickers threaten the victims or their families to keep them quiet. Often, if they get out, they are misjudged by law enforcement or other people and looked down upon as dirty for having something to do with the trafficking industry. The only way to truly stop human trafficking would be if every person that is abusing anyone in the human trafficking industry would stop. It's very hard for law enforcement to get victims out of trafficking because unless they have actual proof, they can't just go in if they are suspicious of a person. If a victim is not identified as an actual human trafficking victim, they are often arrested and prosecuted for crimes related to commercial sex, and it can take years to prosecute trafficking victims. This is improving, but it still needs work. Several new laws have been passed in recent years due to an increase in awareness. You might be thinking, what can you do to help trafficking victims? It's a big problem, and the first step to a solution is to spread awareness. Educate yourselves and others on the subject so that you will know what to do if you come in contact with someone that has been exposed to trafficking. After learning about the problem, the next step would be to look into organizations. There are organizations that help with victims that have been rescued from trafficking, and there are also organizations that help get people out of trafficking. Another thing to do would just to be keeping an eye out for any law or legislation that's being passed to help trafficking victims. In conclusion, trafficking is not a foreign problem. It's something that's happening all over the world and right here in our own city. There is an estimated to be well over 2,000 victims in Omaha alone, and 27 million victims worldwide. Each of these victims is a person that has loved ones. They are someone's mother, daughter, sister, or friend. Imagine if it was one of your loved ones. What would you do to get them out of trafficking? These victims are not a commodity that should be bought and purchased and sold around the world. They are people, and we should be doing all that we can to help stop human trafficking.